Man, that's good. That's good to hear it. Like a lot of times up in the African American community, we use the name Jesus, and now it gets a lot of backlash. Or we use God, or even sometimes Yahweh. We use Yahweh, and some people say, "Oh, that's not the right name. Like the J wasn't in the Hebrew and all that." So how can we address stuff like that? Because I know that Peter talks about like there's no name under heaven by which we must be saved, but the name Christ, Jesus, Jesus. So people say his name wasn't Jesus, so y'all following a false God. Like how can we just combat that foolishness?
There is a lot of controversy around saying God's name. So first you mentioned the J. So in church history, there was a period of time in which Jehovah was the preferred way to refer to God by name. And that comes from a long tradition, but the maybe quick way to explain it is that Jews for a long time did not want to mispronounce God's name or use it inappropriately. So in the Hebrew Bible, when the name Yahweh appeared, so the Hebrew Bible is written just in consonants first, and then hundreds of years later, somebody came along and put the vowels in. So for the name Yahweh, they wanted to make sure people didn't say it by accident. So instead of putting in the vowels for Yahweh, they put in the vowels for Adonai, which means Lord. So that would remind people when they came to that word in Hebrew to say Lord instead of Yahweh, to say Adonai instead of Yahweh. And then somebody came along maybe in the 1800s and was learning Hebrew and trying to read it. And they came to that word and they didn't know it was a nonsense word. They didn't know they weren't supposed to say those vowels with those consonants. So they sounded it out and it was Yahovah, which put through the German language became a J, so Jehovah. So Jehovah is the name. Lots of people, there's hymns with the name Jehovah in it, but it's actually a nonsense word. We can be 100% sure that's not how it was pronounced in ancient Israel. So people were trying, they just didn't know Hebrew well enough to know what was going on with that. So there are still people who say we shouldn't say God's name at all, or the way we should say it is not Yahweh because there's other possible ways to pronounce it. We can't be 100% sure of how it was actually pronounced since they were so careful for so many years not to say it and not to write it with those vowels. But scholars are in pretty widespread agreement that Yahweh is a decent way to pronounce it. Some think it's Yahoo or Yahweh, but I go with Yahweh because it's the most commonly accepted by scholars. And you're right. When Peter is preaching in the book of Acts, he quotes the book of Joel. There is no other name by which we must be saved. And in Joel, that's referring to Yahweh. But he applies that to Jesus, which is a mind-blowing moment because he is essentially calling Jesus God and including Jesus within the divine identity. So he's just conflating the two. He doesn't see a difference between Yahweh and Jesus. So I think it's fine to call God, to pray to Jesus, to use, to call out to Jesus, to worship Jesus. I use the name all the time. Some people would say we should say Yeshua rather than Jesus because Yeshua would be the Aramaic way of pronouncing it. But our New Testament didn't come to us in Aramaic. It came down to us in Greek. So the name comes into English as Jesus. I'm not a big stickler on how you decide to pronounce it. Yeah. I think the big deal is that we're invited to have this personal relationship with God and to represent him.
Right. But you just gave me another way to defend the deity of Christ. So I love that.